The Middle East stands once again at a critical juncture. After more than a year of devastating conflict in Gaza, a fragile glimmer of hope has emerged in the form of a US-backed 20-point peace plan. The negotiations held behind closed doors in Egypt have drawn in leaders and envoys from Washington, Cairo, Doha, and beyond. At the heart of the effort lies one fundamental question: can decades of mistrust be overcome, or will history repeat itself yet again? In an exclusive discussion, Adnan AJ, a respected professor of international relations and US foreign policy at Qatar University, provided a stark assessment of the situation. His analysis laid bare the deep challenges facing the process and the gap between stated aspirations and political realities. The talks have been described as historic, not merely because of the personalities involved, US envoys such as Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, Egyptian mediators, Qatari diplomats, but because they represent perhaps the most serious attempt since the 2024 escalation to halt the cycle of war. The plan's centerpiece is a phased ceasefire in Gaza, coupled with hostage prisoner exchanges and a transitional security arrangement to be supervised by regional and international actors. Yet even as these talks proceed, airstrikes and clashes have not ceased. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, still in office despite international arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court in late 2024, faces mounting pressure from hardliners within his coalition to maintain a military posture. Hamas, while weakened on the battlefield, continues to hold hostages and insists that any deal must guarantee an end to occupation and bombardment. In his remarks, Adnan AJ returned repeatedly to one word: credibility. He said the credibility of the Israel, if they walk the talk, if they live up to the demands by Trump, there's a huge problem with the trust of Netanyahu. For the professor, this credibility gap is the single largest hurdle. He pointed to Netanyahu's long record of skepticism toward any process that envisions a Palestinian state. Netanyahu does not follow with the agreements, and he does not believe in peace. He does not believe in Palestinian states or He only believes in a military solution, according to Adnan AJ, unless the United States is willing to use its leverage to bind Israel to its commitments. Hamas and other Palestinian factions will have no reason to trust the process. He argued that past experiences where deals on hostages or ceasefires were followed by resumed offensives or territorial expansion have made Hamas particularly wary. One of the most sensitive points in the talks is the proposed hostage prisoner exchange. Families on both sides hope for relief, the return of Israeli hostages taken during the conflict, and the release of long-imprisoned Palestinian leaders, among them the veteran figure Marwan Barghouti. Asked whether the inclusion of Barghouti's name on a potential release list would signal a new seriousness on Israel's part, Adnan AJ shifted the focus away from symbolism to substance. The commitment that Hamas wants is stopping the bombing, withdrawing from Gaza, and guarantees from the United States and Arab leaders. He pointed out that despite the announcement of the US plan, airstrikes had continued, casting doubt on Israel's willingness to change course. He stressed that Hamas seeks not just gestures, but enforceable commitments on what comes after the withdrawal. Pressed on whether even the strongest diplomatic assurances could be enforced, the professor was blunt. Netanyahu will not stick to any agreement. He warned that without credible US security guarantees, even an international stabilization force, whether drawn from Arab states or under a UN mandate, could face harassment or obstruction. Yet he left open a glimmer of hope. If the United States guarantee, we might see some optimism coming in the near future. Many observers have criticized the US-backed 20-point plan as too vague to succeed. Some describe it as riddled with holes and grey areas, even as a potential trap for the weaker party. Adnan AJ rejected the idea that the talks were futile. It is not a waste of time. It is a roadmap. It is broad. It is a little bit vague. It needs to be discussed. He argued that while the plan's contours are imperfect, the very act of negotiating creates momentum that could be built upon. The key, he suggested, is not to abandon the process, but to fill in its gaps. According to the professor, former US President Donald Trump, who has sought to portray himself as a peacemaker in the conflict, is indeed serious about achieving a breakthrough, driven, he added, by a desire for swift results. He cited Trump's decision to dispatch not just his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, but also his son-in-law and close advisor, Jared Kushner, to the region as evidence of that urgency. Kushner's presence in the peace mission has raised eyebrows, especially since he holds no formal government portfolio. Asked about this anomaly, Adnan AJ offered an explanation that underscored the economic dimensions of any post-war settlement. Kushner is really interested in the economic sides, rebuilding Gaza. He has some economic interest with Tony Blair. Trump maybe has some interest in Gaza. The professor's remarks hinted at a dimension often overlooked in conflict resolution efforts: the need for credible plans to rebuild shattered infrastructure, revive local economies, and offer people a stake in peace. But they also raised questions about potential conflicts of interest and whether economic motives would skew political decision-making. One of the most profound sticking points is the issue of Palestinian statehood. The US plan refers vaguely to acknowledging Palestinian aspirations, but stops short of outlining a concrete pathway to achieving statehood. Netanyahu has repeatedly rejected the idea outright. As the interviewer noted, the absence of a genuine statehood track risks rendering the deal little more than a temporary truce. Adnan AJ agreed emphatically. They want a complete package, not only a ceasefire. They want to know the end game. Netanyahu does not believe in that. Not only if you look at the history of Netanyahu, he never believes in the Oslo Agreement. He never believes in a Palestinian state. He warned that for Trump to succeed in closing this chapter of conflict and pivot toward other strategic goals, such as formalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, he would need to secure at least a credible commitment toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. Without that, the professor suggested, neither Hamas nor key Arab partners would be willing to buy in. The peace talks are not occurring in a vacuum. The conflict has drawn in a host of regional players, each with its own stakes. Egypt is playing host to the negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh, seeking both stability on its border and international credit as a mediator. Qatar, which has historically provided both aid and political support to Gaza, serves as a crucial channel of communication with Hamas. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently acknowledged that Washington had asked Ankara to use its influence to persuade Hamas to engage constructively, highlighting Turkey's role as an interlocutor. Pakistan's foreign minister clarified that the current US version of the plan differs from earlier Muslim coalition drafts, signaling Islamabad's cautious distance. At the same time, the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for Netanyahu in late 2024 has complicated Israel's international standing and limited his ability to travel freely. Domestically, Netanyahu's governing coalition has frayed. Several key partners have defected, leaving him with a de facto minority and a weakened grip on power. These dynamics create a paradox. On one hand, Netanyahu may be under pressure to demonstrate statesmanship to salvage his political legacy. On the other, he faces hardline factions that view any concession to Hamas or recognition of Palestinian sovereignty as unacceptable. The professor's insistence on guarantees reflects the bitter lessons of previous attempts at peacemaking. Over the decades, from the Oslo Accords of the 1990s to various ceasefire arrangements in the 2000s and 2010s, initial agreements often collapsed amid accusations of bad faith and continued violence. In each case, the absence of an enforceable mechanism to ensure compliance by both sides left space for spoilers to derail the process. Today, the stakes are no less severe. With Gaza devastated by months of conflict, tens of thousands killed, and millions displaced, humanitarian needs are dire. Any ceasefire that fails to deliver tangible and lasting relief risks reigniting violence. For Hamas, the credibility of any process hinges on guarantees of an end to occupation and bombardment. For Israel, security assurances, especially concerning the disarmament of Hamas, are non-negotiable. Bridging that gap is the core challenge of the US-backed initiative. As negotiations grind on, expectations remain cautious. While the exchange of hostage and prisoner lists has injected some optimism, the gulf over fundamental issues persists. The plan's ambiguity on statehood, the distrust of Netanyahu's intentions, and the still unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza all weigh heavily on the prospects of success. For the professor from Qatar University, the way forward lies in credible US leverage and enforceable guarantees. Without them, he warned, history is likely to repeat itself. Agreements on paper, followed by renewed conflict on the ground. He sees the talks not as a panacea, but as a necessary step. It is a roadmap, he said. Broad and vague though it may be, it provides at least a starting point for dialogue. Abandoning it, in his view, would squander what little momentum exists toward halting the bloodshed. The Gaza peace talks of 2025 represent more than a diplomatic exercise. They embody a test of political will, credibility, and the capacity of international actors to move beyond slogans toward enforceable commitments. The presence of high-profile envoys and the convergence of regional stakeholders suggests that a window of opportunity, however narrow, still exists. But as Adnan AJ repeatedly emphasized, without a genuine commitment to Palestinian self-determination and without the means to guarantee compliance by all sides, even the most elaborate plans will fail. The world watches as negotiations continue in Sharm el-Sheikh. The people of Gaza, exhausted by war and displacement, and the families of hostages held in both Israel and Gaza wait for tangible change. The stakes could not be higher. The outcome will hinge on whether leaders can finally align aspirations with enforceable action, transforming a roadmap into a viable path to peace.